Right.
So just how Israel wants its own autonomy and its own state, do you not see how if you come on a land that I've been living on for 19 centuries, which is almost 2,000 years, and you're telling me that in order for me to be able to, live under your rule, I have to renounce my religion, which is a super important thing for people around there. But if you become a Jew, how do you like?
You have to be a Jew to be Israeli. There's Arabs, Israelis, so 20% of Israel right now.
Being the most dangerous commentary show on Beyonce's internet comes with its own set of challenges. YouTube time and time again refuses to promote our videos because we have very controversial takes on extremely sensitive subjects. So chances are, if you stumbled on this clip by accident, you'll never get to see our content again unless you hit that subscribe button. It only takes 1 second. But either way, we're glad you're here. And now, back to the clip. All right, ladies and gentlemen, hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Shock and Awe podcast, arguably the most dangerous commentary show on Beyonce's internet. I am your host, Mr. Robbie Hollywood, and what a show we got for you this week. A little bit of a different setup this week. We're doing a special on the whole Israeli-Palestine conflict going on right now. With me today is my really good friend, Nathan Shasham. What's up, baby? Chacham. I don't know if I said that right,
okay,
man.
Bro, don't worry.
Hey, to my Jewish overlords.
Nathan X.
Hey, to my Jewish overlords, I will be learning how to pronounce that properly. So here is the idea, Nathan. Here's why I called you on, right? So obviously, lots going on right now.
Yeah, a lot going on, yeah.
It's beyond heartbreaking, right? For me personally, too, coming from a place where I've watched a lot of people die over a very short period of time. I don't know if you know this, but I'm from Rwanda. I'm of Rwandan origin.
Yeah.
So I'm very familiar with kind of
atrocities.
Yeah, atrocities, genocide, etc. Right?
Yeah.
But what I've been seeing, what is different with something that is going on in the age of social media is there is a big media battle, right? There is, I don't want to call it quote unquote a version that is given to you by mainstream media. But then you look at a social media aspect. And what I've been seeing on social media is, there is two hard factions, right? And I've seen friends, right? People who were close to each other, but now have been very much divided over this conflict. Right.
And
sad. The whole point of me organizing this is I'm like, you know what? Let me get my friend on the show and actually be able to have a conversation where people are able to kind of share their points of view without getting emotional or, you know what I mean? Because we all live in certain echo chambers, right?
Right.
If you're pro-Palestine on this thing, everything that you're seeing on social media is pro-Palestine. If you're pro-Israel, everything that you're seeing is pro-Israel, right? So whenever people meet in real life or try to discuss these things because you've been absorbing information from your echo chamber, it's very hard to be able to kind of take somebody else's opinion into account and being able to be like, okay, you know what? Let's actually discuss these things and see where people go, right? I definitely chose you because obviously I've known you for a while. You're a well-spoken gentleman, right? You and I were in the same business for a long time, so I know that you're able to express your points, right? So I guess I will start with, tell me a bit about how, because you are of Jewish descent.
Yeah.
Not Israeli, but Russian. Yeah. But tell me a bit about how this has affected you, the people close to you, your own experience to it. What were you when you found out, etc.?
Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, as Robbie said, I am a Jew, proud Jew, born and raised in Toronto. My parents came from the former Soviet Union, which a lot of Jews actually came from when they were in Eastern Europe. I mean, when it comes to Ukraine and Russia and everything like that. Grew up Jewish. Traditional, not overly religious or anything like that, but always a strong sense of identity, and also a very strong, attachment and connection to the state of Israel, right? Seeing it as our homeland and everything like that. So, for me, when Saturday came out, and Saturday we had all of this news that just started flooding, right, about the atrocities and things like that. As a Jew and everyone from the Jewish community, for us it always hits from home, just because every Jew that either has lived there, been there, or has family that is there, so it's always gonna touch a little bit close home to home. So when I was just at home, got started getting blow ups from my phone about hey, did you see this? Did you see this? All these videos flooding in of just, things that are going to be glued to the back of my eyelids now. And yeah, man, I mean, it's been tough. So I have like close friend of mine that have been very affected with this. I got a friend of mine that his fiance and her sister has been missing now for since Saturday, and as well as friends of friends of people that were at the festival that ended up passing away. So yeah, it's a hard time. It's definitely a hard time. And I understand on both sides, right? The suffering, because it's never easy, right? With this conflict, there's going to be a lot of people that are going to be affected.
Right. So I mean, so the idea was, look, I personally, for me, I'll tell you where I land on this whole thing.
Yeah.
Right. The idea of violence against civilians is unacceptable in no way, shapes, or form. Right.
Right.
I don't care what your cause is. If in order to attract attention to your cause, you have to murder innocent men, women, and children, that there is no conversation from there. Right. So, all that taken into consideration, though, what I'm seeing is, and this is what you see a lot in this whenever there is an Israeli-Palestine conflict, is there will be these atrocities that happened, but the majority of mainstream media always tend to lean towards the Israel side of things, right? But if you look at the popular, kind of like the quote-unquote popular opinion, if you look at social media, that like the Palestinian cause kind of really does attract a lot of people, because it's kind of like, a lack of a better analogy, is this David against Goliath situation,
right?
Where you have the state of Israel that is militarily advanced 1,000,000 times over, right? And you have, these, the kind of like the Palestinian side, where you have these kids who are fighting with rocks, and yes, they have their rockets, but Israel has the Iron Dome, so they don't do as much damage. So there's a lot of people that look at him like, look, what do you expect from a group of people who, for years, have felt marginalized? They feel like they're inside this kind of like quote unquote open air prison, which is a term they've been hearing a lot, about the Gaza Strip.
Sure.
The fact that, with the blockade in place that has been in place, the inability to be able to get in aid, to be able to get in, to be able to get in medicine and all these type of things.
Right.
And then people kind of look at it and they're like, well, how do you expect them to be able to react? So what do you say to something like that?
Right. No, I understand, like being a Jew, being somebody who, has a lot of Israeli friends. I can look at things from a 30,000 foot stance, and I can take a look at the suffering, the legitimate suffering of what the Palestinians are actually going through on the ground level, right? We're talking about your regular people that just want to live normal lives, that want to prosper, that want to live free. They don't want to feel like they're being marginalized or anything like that. The thing that always comes up in this conversation when it comes to Israel and Palestine, every time, like right now, this situation is happening, or in 2021, we had another flare up, or in 2018, is that we get so caught up in the presentism of the moment, meaning that we just kind of look at the situation is, and then we don't see the bigger context of everything, right? And it could go both ways, right? So, for instance, right now with what Hamas did on Saturday, which is probably one of the most disgusting things I've ever seen, that like I said, it's going to be glued to the back of my eyes probably for the rest of my life. You know what I mean? Like Holocaust,
all of us, yeah,
Holocaust level types of atrocity. We could look at that and be like, oh well, how could they dare do that? They're going and slaughtering civilians. Obviously there's a bigger context there. The same way when Gaza's getting bombed, or what led to what you said, like in terms of Palestinians being marginalized, or blockaded, or being in the conditions that are, there's also a bigger context, because that doesn't exist in its own vacuum.
Right.
So I mean, if you want to talk about the history, I'd be more than happy to.
That's also what I was gonna get into. So if we kind of like take a bit of a journey in time, right? From what I know now, I did go to school for political science, but it was just, I don't remember shit. I graduated, but I was just there drinking and partying. So, but in terms of, from what I understand, as to the origin of the state of Israel, right? The claim that the Jewish people have on that land is a claim that goes, that originally it's a biblical kind of claim where, hey, God promised this land to Abraham and his descendants, et cetera, right? Now, up until the late 19th century, the Jewish because there hadn't been a major Jewish population in the area since the 1st century when the Romans destroyed the Temple of Jerusalem, right?
70 AD.
Yeah, it's 60, 68 AD, something like that.
The land 135 AD.
Right. Now, mind you, the way the state of Israel was created, to me, frankly speaking, one of the main culprits that nobody seems to be blaming is the United Kingdom.
I know.
Because if you look at it, the way this was set up is in World War I, the UK and Germany were at war. So the UK had 3 allies. It was France. It was France, Russia, and the UK. They want to topple the Ottoman Empire, which is in alliance with the Germans. So now they understand that in order to topple the Ottomans, they're going to need the help of the Arabs, right?
Yeah.
So the UK goes and promises the Arabs, they're like, hey, you know what? If you help us topple the Ottomans, you can now have a unified Arab state, right?
Yep.
The Arabs buy into it.
Yep.
At the same time, what happens down the road is UK is now losing World War I. Russia is in the middle of a revolution. The Bolsheviks finally take over. And the calculation that the UK did, the reason why they wanted to bring the Jews close was 2 things. One, they wanted to bring the U.S. into World War I. And they understood that the Jewish bourgeoisie out in the States had certain connections that can help with that. At the same time, too, a part of the Bolshevik group in Russia that had been taking over the control of government, a portion of them were Jews, but the way the miscalculation happened is those Jews that were in Russia did not believe in Zionism. What they believed in was, hey, we in our land. At the same time, too, because that conversation started coming up in Europe because anti-Semitism was growing, and there was talks of migrating, setting up a Jewish state. They first talked about Uganda and Argentina and all these places, and then settled on Palestine. So now the UK, in order to bring in the Jews, makes them the promise of a Jewish homeland, right? So that's the UK is now making 2 sets of promises to 2 different sets of people. Yeah. World War I ends. The Treaty of Versailles happens. The winners are now dividing the spoils. So the English wanted control of that Palestine area because they wanted easy access to India to be able to move their products, right? And that's how they decided to. And that's when you had things like the Balfour Declaration, where now it gets put out that the UK will now be validating
they're going to make an initiative.
They're going to initiative towards a Jewish state,
the land,
right? Yeah. So now, when you look at that, like, do you kind of sympathize with the fact that the Arabs felt cheated and lied to, and therefore can be a catalyst to more things going wrong in that aspect?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, just to provide a little bit of context, right? Because, I mean, Palestine at that time, or even that land, it wasn't like something that was in a vacuum in terms of Jewish history, right? I mean, when we're going to talk about the history of the land, the first Jewish kingdom was established by King David in 930. Now, you did mention something in terms of biblical claims, and I do want to make this very, very clear. Anytime that I am talking about this conflict, I keep my Torah in the Ark. I don't bring the Bible into the conversation as much as possible, because then we can get into really mucky waters. I like to keep things very factual. I like to keep things historical. I like to keep things political and sociological, right? So I do want to make that preference first and foremost. But historically speaking, archaeologically speaking, the Jews, that's where we descended. That is the cradle of our civilization. That is where, as a people, we were born. That's where we had our identity. We had our kingdom for about 1,000 years. Now, did we have different colonial powers? We had the Assyrians, we had the Babylonians, we had the Greeks, we had the Romans. I mean,
the Ottomans,
different occupying powers coming, bringing us in, exiling us out of the land, up until the time that the Romans actually kicked us out. And so we fell into something called the Jewish diaspora, meaning that old Jews, we scattered to North Africa, we scattered to the Middle East, we scattered to Europe, but we never lost what our true identity is, right? So people think that Judaism is just like, that it's just a religion, but Judaism is almost like a suitcase. So Judaism is what we carried with us in order to keep our cultures, our values, our religion, which is tied to it as well. But ultimately, it's what makes us Jews. And this whole return back to Zion has been ingrained within our identity, the return back to Jerusalem. By the way, Zion means Jerusalem, guys, just if anybody doesn't know what the etymology of the word means.
Right.
but basically to come back to Jerusalem. So even within our prayers, we pray 3 times a day. We in our prayers is mentioned that next year in Jerusalem, we will come back to our homeland, our ancestral homeland, where we were indigenous to. And so up until the 5th century, we were still somewhat of a majority in the population, even though 10% stayed, but in terms of people that are living there, we were the majority. But then that number began to fall. Then you had, after that, you had the Byzantine Empire, you had the Arab caliphates. So this is when the spread of Islam ended up happening. That's where a lot of the Arabs started coming into it around the 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th century. They were switching hands between the Crusaders. You had the Mamelukes, and then you had the Ottoman Empire. Now, the Ottoman Empire, they're Turks, right? They're not Arabs,
right?
But they run the land. And Palestine at that time, it was just a regional. It was just a region of land of an empire, right? It was just colonial land. The same way Siberia is not a country, but it's a region. The Sahara is not a country; it's a region. So was the region of Palestine at that time. Can I say my first controversial hot take right now?
Hey, man, listen. This is the Shock and Awe podcast, baby. There's nothing controversial. We aim to shock.
Can I bring the first shock?
Yeah, go ahead, baby. Let's hear it. Let's hear it.
Let's hear it. Put on your seatbelt for this one.
Damn.
Palestine was never a country.
Damn.
I'm going to say that again. Palestine was never a country.
Please do explain.
It never had its own sovereignty. It never had its own independence. It never had its own unique identity. Unlike how you have it today, where it's like we identify as Palestinians, that identity didn't really come into shape until about 1964 with Yasser Arafat with the PLO. So they never had a king. They never had a leadership. It was just a colonial region of different empires that were ruling it at that time. Now, as I was saying before, the Jews, for them to come back to the land, to come back to Zion. So the pilgrimage, actually, there was pilgrimages that were happening in the 1700s, 1800s, but Zionism, the movement of Zionism, really came full-fledged in the 1890s with a guy named Theodore Herzl.
Right.
And the reason why it happened is because of the Dreyfus affair. So in France, there was a really high-profile case where there was a Jew that was
he was a corporal or something like that, I believe.
He was general of an army, of a French army, and he was accused for treason, right? And it turns out that he was actually innocent, but because of anti-Semitism, anti-Semitism is also a deep thing. We could do a whole podcast just on anti-Semitism alone, but in Europe at that time, Jews were going through a lot of persecution, whether it was through the pogroms in Russia, whether it was getting kicked out of Spain. We were always seen as an other. No matter how much we tried to assimilate with the community, no matter how much we tried to pretend that we were European, it's like, yeah, we're white, but clearly we weren't white enough, So we realized the necessity for us to have our own self-determination, and to basically have our own homeland, right? To have our own security, to have everything. And what better place than our historical homeland where we originally came from, right? So that's where the Zionist movement.
So let me ask you a question. Do you think there is a difference between anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism?
The answer, the clear answer is there a difference? No, but can there be shades of gray? Yes. So what do I mean by that?
So okay. So just for the people to understand, so anti-Semitism obviously is the open hatred of Jewish people just for being Jews. Anti-Zionism is the idea of
against the state of Israel.
Against the state of Israel itself,
existing,
right?
Yeah.
Right.
Essentially, what you're doing is that when you're saying that you're an anti-Zionist, meaning that you believe that the Jews do not have a right to their own self-determination. They do not have a right to have their own protection, their own.
But you mentioned something, right? Like so for because do you see how for a Palestinian farmer who lived on that land, whose family lived on that land since the 1st century, 19 centuries later, all they see is this migration of, because back then they were looked at as quote unquote just white people coming in and colonizing some more when we were promised freedom, quote unquote, right? Sure. So do you see how it's possible for somebody to observe that way when they tell you that you have to now cede your farm to a group of quote unquote what they think is Europeans actually coming in? Yeah. Right. So, but do you see how somebody can look at that as, hey, I understand that you're saying that you have a claim to it, but my family has. So let me give you an example, sure. Right? How if you look at mainstream media, right? Mainstream media would tell you that the Russian invasion of Ukraine is a crime because Ukrainians have the right to their own self-autonomy. They have the right to be able to defend themselves. So. What would stop a Russian, the Russians for being like, hey, listen, this land was part of the USSR. We have some sort of ancestral claim to it because our people used to live here, etc. But then the same mainstream media would turn around and say that the Palestinians somehow don't have the right to be able to feel that same exact way.
Right.
Do you not see how there is some kind of like hypocrisy there?
I do.
Yeah.
Now, here's a really important thing, right? Like, I mean, Jews, Arabs, Christians, they all lived coexistently with one another, right? They had a lot of peace. It's not like, they were warring with one another, right? So to live in harmony is totally fine. What I do want to state here, though, and this is also very important, when you look at the British mandate of Palestine, what Palestine actually was, it wasn't just what you see as Israel proper today, but it also included Transjordan. That was the whole mandate of Palestine,
right?
And this is important because a lot of times people forget about this. Is that Jordan, which was, by the way, the majority of where the British, the Arab population was. But here's the thing: when you're looking at the whole land from the 1800s. A lot of people don't really know this, but at the time, and Mark Twain, there's authors that actually wrote about this that made, that visited Israel and saw, the land. It was extremely underdeveloped and it was extremely underpopulated, right? We're talking about a population of like what? It was like 400,000, 500,000.
I think before the main migration, I think like up until like 1918, Jews were like 8% of the population down there in that land, and like 80
about until 1890, about 8%, but in
but no, even like that, like the end of old, like because the first like settlers came when, like
1890,
what? 1890, yeah.
Kibbutz, that
right,
sort of thing. Which, by the way, they didn't steal the land from anybody. They didn't take it from anybody. They bought that land. So they came there. They bought the land from, because since it was a region of a colony of an empire, right? There was people that would have been in like Lebanon or Egypt, but they owned land in Palestine because it was just seen as one empire, so to speak.
Right.
So they bought that land from those people. Here's the hot take. From 1890 to 1947, the Jews did not kick anybody or steal anybody's land from anybody. And I would like to challenge anybody to.
But here is where you just mentioned something like, they came in, they bought the land. See, the issue, like, I think the main issue, the reason why they call like Israel an apartheid state is if you come in and you buy the land and suddenly now you set up these political systems that advantage one group of people over another. You know what I mean? Like because those people that live on that land, like they have been there for a very long time. So the problem is not coming in and kicking them out. It's coming in and making their day-to-day life extremely difficult, right? You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
Right? Like you can come in and you buy the land, but now if you tell me as your neighbor that you are entitled to certain rights that I'm not entitled to, which is a fact. We can't deny the fact that, the especially very prominent people at that time that were running the state of Israel clearly said that the state of Israel is there to advance Jewish interests more than anything else, right? Which is understandable to a certain way. But do you also see how, even if you came in and you bought the land, well, I mean, this is where my whole family has lived forever. So now you're telling me that there are certain rights that this group of people that just moved in is entitled to and that I'm not, even if you bought the land and you have the title and all these type of things. But the political system being instilled is going to create a lot of issues because some people are going to feel put upon.
Yeah, no, I get where you're coming from. But and I do want to say this, and I wish that we can actually pull up like a map or something. Maybe we can do this on.
No, we can do that.
Thing. But when you actually look at the settlements that the Jewish pilgrimage was making during the Zionist movement, it wasn't in Arab areas, right? So they were mostly like Tel Aviv did not exist, Haifa did not exist, right? A lot of the Mediterranean West Coast.
Is that a map of Israel? Is that what you wanted to look at?
Yeah, I mean, if you wanted to even look at that,
like what the original map before the divide.
I mean, just so you can actually see where the settlements of the Jews that were there. Now, mind you, here's the thing. You ready for this one? Here's another hot take. The Arabs had no authority in that land. It was the Ottomans that actually had the authority.
Right.
And when it comes to political systems, it wasn't Jewish political systems, right? It was the Ottomans' political systems, and it was the British political systems, up until the point that the state of Israel was actually established. And in 1948, when they actually declared independence, they said that we've declared independence for a Jewish state, and all other, whether Arabs, Christians, Muslims, will be naturalized into the country. They will have full citizenship. They'll have full equal rights. They will not be discriminated against or anything like that. They will have full equal status.
if you look at the Balfour Declaration, though, even in that declaration before everything begun, Palestinians were not even referred to as Palestinians. They were referred to as non-Jewish citizens. You know what I mean? So they were told, because the idea is they were told that, hey, you will have your quote unquote human rights. But for example, there was no voting rights for Palestinians in a Jewish state, right? They couldn't vote. They couldn't take like governmental positions or anything like that. Unless they became Israeli. Now try to picture that.
Right.
So just how Israel wants its own autonomy and its own state, do you not see how if you come on a land that have been living on for 19 centuries, which is almost 2,000 years, and you're telling me that in order for me to be able to, live under your rule, I have to renounce my religion, which is a super important thing for people around there. But if you become a Jew, how do you like? You
have to be a Jew to be Israeli. There's Arabs, Israelis. So 20% of Israel right now is Arab or other.
No, we're talking about like right at the beginning, at the beginning of the state of Israel. Like it was made very clear that if you are quote unquote a non-Jewish citizen, you will be entitled, yes, to whatever is defined as human rights.
Right.
But true, like, and even then, it's still going on right now. For example, in the West Bank, like if you're considered, like there is that divide in the West Bank where you have one side, I think it's on the east where the Palestinians are, and I don't know exactly what the divide.
It's divided into from the Oslo Accords. You had 1993. You had Area A, Area B, and Area C.
But see, the issue with that, though, if you look at it, for example, the Palestinian areas, things like, like basic functions, like, like proper schools and all that stuff, they would tell you in the West Bank that, hey, if you want your kids to go to a half-decent school, become Israeli.
Right.
But do you see how, like, it could make people feel like, what? So now I gotta denounce, my own citizenship and my own ancestry in order for my kids to be able to go to a good school, to be able to have a half decent hospital.
Yeah. So here's the thing, right? And I know that we're going to the present and let's keep it right at the nucleus of like when all this was forming down, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because you did say something a little bit earlier. The British did cause a lot of problems because they made promises both to the Jews and they made promises also to the Arabs, right?
Mm-hmm.
In 1937, they set up something called the Peel Commission. They said, okay, clearly that there's two distinct populations that are here, right?
Mm-hmm.
We made up up until about the 30s and the 40s, we're about 33% of the population. The Arabs were about 66% of the population. Here's ready for another hot take?
How many of these can we take?
Here's the one with the Here's the other one with the right? That a lot of people don't want to talk about. The population of Arabs from 1922 to 1947 increased by 120%. And nobody likes to talk about that because during the British mandate of Palestine, there were Arabs that were migrating from Egypt, Syria, and at that time, Transjordan. Because there was a lot of jobs, there was a lot of opportunity to work for the British. So they were slowly migrating there. I think that we can also agree that, okay, well, if these Jews are migrating here, they're not originally from here. They're not, quote unquote, the indigenous original people. I mean, what would you say about with half the Arab population that's there? But that's not mentioned. They're just seen as already indigenous as is. Now, here's the thing. I have no problem with the Arabs living in the land. Absolutely not. Especially if they've been there for several centuries. I mean, even if the Arab caliphates came there 9, 10, the 11th century, I think they have the right to be there. So in 1937, the British are like, okay, you know what? We'll set up something called the Peel Commission. We're willing to divide the land. 10% for the Jews, 90% for the Arabs.
Was that how the division was initially?
Yeah.
Okay.
It was in 37, not 40, not the UN partition plan.
Right.
It came a little bit later. But the first drawing of the lines of like, okay, clearly there's two populations here. We have an indigenous people, what are the Jews, even though they came from different places, that's totally fine. They're still indigenous to the land because that's where their ancestry originally came from. Like I said, they didn't steal the land from anybody. They bought the land. They cultivated the land. I mean, at the time, it was just all swamps. They were just going to give them 10%. And the Jews said yes, because at that time, we were desperate to have a land just because of all the persecution that was happening all around the world. We're just like, okay, we just want a state for ourselves. That's it. The Arabs rejected it. And at that time, they had something called the Arab Revolt. And that's when there was a lot of strife happening. The violence didn't happen during the time of after 1948. And we can get into what happened.
Well, yeah, the violence started like what? We're talking about like 1930.
We're talking about massacres that happened, like pogroms, like 1922. There's the 1929 Hebron massacre where Jews actually lived. It was their villages. And the Arabs came and just
but then if you go on that far back in massacres too, there is things like the I think it's Deria scene or something like that. It was because I believe that, I don't know if that was after, it was like right before like and the independence of Israel, where and also too, that's another thing, because I want to get into that like a little bit once we start talking Hamas and terrorism and stuff like that. So maybe we'll go into, because I know people talk about like, oh, there is no moral equivalency to what has happened. But if you look in history, because but yeah, like just finish your point, and then once we start talking like Hamas and terrorism and stuff like that, then we get into those
I think any
other
reasonable
subjects.
person, when they're looking at the situation, knowing that the Jews, when they first came in there, which is their ancestral homeland, like I said, they've had a continuous. They never not had a presence in that land, right? Even though the Native Americans, they're obviously a huge minority today compared to everybody else. Nobody can deny the fact that they still had an ongoing, everlasting presence in that land. So have the Jews. I think that nobody.
So would you support Native Americans rising up against the current system to claim their quote-unquote ancestral land? Like, if that happened, would you support something like that?
Well, I'll tell you this. It's not that even that I would support it. The thing is, if they did that, they're just put in a position where they don't have the might to do so. Right. So they just don't mind. And what are most people here in the West going to be? It's like, hey, look, the time has passed. The wars have been fought.
Right.
And this is really going to be shocking. War means war, guys. Right. So when the war happens, like, we're not playing a game of dominoes here.
Right.
Like we're like, especially when you start the war. And we can get into how the war started, but when you start a war, when you wage a war, you're putting a wager, meaning that you're putting your chips on the table.
Right.
Let the best man win, kind of thing. Right. I think we can agree that as sad as it is, they lost the war. So in a lot of ways, they kind of don't have the same position that they had prior to before, when the actual wars started. Now, if you ask me the question, do I believe that the Native Americans, if they start rising, I mean, the best that we could do is provide them at least some autonomy within it. I mean, that was the best that we did.
Right.
Right.
So, So then maybe we'll move to the conversation about terrorism. So as I mentioned at the beginning of the show, I have the moment, even if I sympathize with your cause, right? The moment you start killing innocent men, women, and children, there is no discussion to be had there, right?
I agree. Robbie, can I say something? Just I do want to establish something. I think, and to all your viewers watching, I think any reasonable person, just because we went through all this history, I think any reasonable person would be like, you know what? I think it's fair that the Jews, if they can't live with the Arabs, let them have their own autonomy, their own independence, let them live in peace, and let the Arabs also have their own.
So you believe in kind of like a two-state solution type of?
I'm a hawk. I'm not a hawk. I'm a dove. Okay, I want peace, right? So if a two-state solution is going to be something peaceful, I'm not an extreme Zionist. I'm not somebody that wants like, I'm not like a biblical zealot that's like, oh no, this is given to us. And
but see, that's the thing too, right? Even if we're talking about the possibility of a two-state solution, when even in the conversation, Israel continues to annex parts of the West Bank, even through the conversation, they're like, because, and it's also like, tell me if I'm wrong, but it's something I noticed where like, whenever there is like negotiations about to happen. So let's say, for example, they would say like, okay, do we want Israel to go back to the 1948 line? And then right before these negotiations happen, there will be like what Israel likes to refer to as what was the term? Mowing the lawn, right? They will mow the lawn where they're going to either the West Bank or Gaza. You know what I mean? Strife happens, they move the line, and then what would happen is in the negotiation, they will go back to whatever the initial lines they were at to show that there is some sort of concessions happening. This is something that you tend to see quite a bit. Now, here's my question for you, right? When we're talking about even the possibility of a two-state solution, because a one-state solution doesn't seem like it's going to happen, especially if we're asking people to renounce whatever their ethnicity or background, whatever it is, right? So if we start talking about a two-state solution, but even in the conversation, there is this continual influx of settlers into the West Bank, inflaming the situation over and over again. One would think that if you like you shaking my hand with one hand, but then playing behind my back in the other, right? Yeah. Because if you're telling me that, hey, we want to be able to work out a two-state solution, but your settlers are still even some that like even the settlements that are considered to be illegal in the West Bank that the government of Israel considers illegal, those illegal settlements still have protection from the Israeli government. So you can't tell me that you think that something is illegal and then protect it at the same time and tell me that you're negotiating in good faith. You see what I'm saying? Yeah. So how do you get around that? How do we even talk about it?
Yeah, definitely. So I mean, I think it's really important to know how the annexations happen, how the quote unquote occupied, disputed areas. How did we get there? So let's go back to 1947. The UN said, okay, the British left, by the way, because they were like, hey, we don't want to deal with this problem.
Right? Yeah. They just handed it to the UN, and
they started the problem.
I know.
Started it.
I know.
They're like,
God
adios,
damn.
we're out of here.
Yeah.
So what did they do? They gave the mandate to Palestine to the UN, right? So it's for the UN to figure out. And so the UN said, okay, we're gonna draft up. Mind you, the the mandate of Palestine at that time, you had what you would see now: Israel, West Bank, Gaza. You also had Transjordan. So the plan was to give all of Transjordan to the Arabs, as well as a good chunk of the West Bank, which we call Judea and Samaria, and give them a good part of the Gaza. And the Jews were going to get a little slip
Right.
on the West Coast, and also the southern land, but that was all barren desert. It wasn't even the good part of the land. It wasn't the fertile part of the land. The Arabs actually got the better deal out of it. 1947, the Jews, we accepted it. The Arabs said no. We reject it. We will not have any Jewish state here at all, even if it's the size of a postage stamp. That says, you know what? The Arab League, they said that we don't need the UN. We don't need the international community. We're going to go to war. We're going to drive them to the sea. We're going to basically, as the Arab leaders were saying at the time, we will paint the road from Jerusalem to Damascus with the skulls of Jews. That was the battle cry at the time. So they went and they waged the war. So at that time, 5 surrounding Arab armies. We're talking about 5 countries. We're talking about Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, Egypt, and Iraq. All invaded Israel, the newfound state. And though the war lasted for about a year, and they lost. They ended up losing the war. Yes. Now did the lines start to change? Sure, but there was never a peace agreement.
Right.
There was always it was just a ceasefire, and it was just kind of like ceasefire tension, but just kind of coexist. So they started that war expecting to win that war, because when we're talking about a war of wiping out a total amount of people and a total amount of land, it's genocidal in nature, especially when that was always been the battle cry. The thing that most people don't want to talk about when it comes to this conflict is the undercurrent of like a very common theme about what's been always happening, is that one side has been willing to have peace. The other side has always been thirsty for blood. The other side does not want to live with the other side. From the very beginning, I'm talking before annexations. I'm talking about before the settlements and things of that sort. Now, I do want to direct your answer, or give you an answer on the question that you asked me about the settlements and everything like that. The settlements came about after 1967. In 1967, you had the 6-Day War. Once again, they went and mounted another offensive against Israel and lost that war. This time we annexed the Sinai Peninsula, we got the Golan Heights, the West Bank, we got Gaza. And of course, when you win a defensive war and there's still no peace agreement, you have to move the line. You have to move the front line just in case there's going to be another attack. So by a UN standard, it was a legal occupation from a strategic standpoint. Now, here's the thing. Here's another hot take. Palestine never even declared stateship. So what does that mean? Palestine was never sovereign. It was a disputed area. So even the West Bank, Gaza right now, it's still a stateless state. Because the reason why they haven't declared it is because for them to declare statehood would have to in turn recognize that the state of Israel exists as well. And they do not want to do that because they want it all. From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. That has been the battle cry.
Right. No, so in that aspect, right? We're again, so like, because if you look at it, like let's talk about actually, yes, the statehood of Palestine, right? Sure. So right now you have 2 different factions, right? You have Fatah running the West Bank, and you have Hamas running the Gaza Strip, right?
Yeah.
Or whatever is left of it now, right? Now, here's the thing, right? So that's why I wanted to kind of like talk about the idea of like the concept of terrorism. The blockade of Gaza really intensified when Hamas was elected to run the Gaza Strip, right?
Yep.
Now, my question for you is, because if I look at it this way, and this is what I despise the most about this whole situation, is the fact that what Hamas did last weekend, you can't tell me they did that for the liberation of Palestine. No fucking way. Like you're not gonna tell, because you knew what was gonna happen. You knew that the moment you guys crossed that line, the entire land was gonna get pulverized, right, and a lot of people are gonna get lost. From what I see, I think Hamas's main problem is the fact that Israel and Saudi Arabia were kind of slowly getting into bed, which they want to create this kind of corridor from India through Saudi Arabia and into Israel and into Europe, where they can move goods, which cuts out Iran, obviously, right? So now, you have also Hamas having a problem with that, because the moment now Israel and Saudi Arabia make some sort of peace understanding or peace treaty,
Right.
now if you involve Israel into a war because of that treaty, now you're also involving Saudi Arabia. They don't want that. So obviously, none of it has to do with the liberation of Palestine. What they wanted to do was create a ruckus. Israel is going to come in, just burn everything to the ground. And now that makes it impossible for Saudi Arabia to align itself with what is seen in the Arab world as a murderous Israel. Right? Now, I don't think the 2 million people on the Gaza Strip are all doing those kind of geopolitical calculations, right? Some of these people, they just want peace, they just want to raise their kids, but they're stuck into this cage, pretty much.
Chaos, yeah.
Where you can't leave, right? They're telling you, okay, we're gonna bomb this building. You got 10 minutes to get out, but go where? There is nowhere to go if everything is getting pulverized. Right. So my question for you is, why would the people of the Gaza Strip choose the leadership of a Hamas, right? Well knowing that these people don't have their best interests at heart, right?
Right.
But still decide to put these people in power in order to, for what reason would they choose something like that?
The funny thing is, right? Hamas wasn't as bloodthirsty and murderous as it is today. Funny enough, it was just a political party. They were just slightly a little bit more liberal in the early 2000s as a political party. So for them to kind of foresee the death and destruction that Hamas has led them into, when you have a leadership, right, where once it's been elected into power, there is no defying it in any way, shape, or form, meaning that you can't elect it out. Can't speak out against it. Back in I think it was in 2018 that they had a protest and Hamas just started shooting at its own people. You literally have like a police state. Essentially speaking, with radicalism. The people are stuck. They're stuck. Not only are they stuck geographically speaking, but they're also stuck politically in a lot of different ways. A good amount. The population of Gaza increased from something like 1 point something million to about 2 million. And so a lot of those people that are there are under the age of 25.
Yeah, right? I think something like what? Like 50% is under 20 or something like that?
Something like that, right?
Yeah.
So when for those kids growing up, they didn't know anything else, right? They grew up with Hamas.
And that's
what kind of became the status quo.
Right.
They didn't even know anything else even existed. And they were taught growing up to hate Israel, to hate the Jews, that all the problems come from Israel. And by the way, we can critique Israel. Israel is she's not immune from criticism of any kind. The problem that I'm seeing is that too much of that blame and criticism is put only on Israel a lot of the times. It's only now we're starting to see the problems of Hamas.
Right.
It's kind of sad that it had to go to get to this point, when blood had to spill the way that it did on Saturday.
And that brings me to so when we're talking about terrorism, right? As I mentioned, the moment you start thinking that, hey, that the murder of innocent people is something that is permissible, I have a big issue with that, right? But when you have a group of people who are, again, in this open air prison, there is no form of armaments coming in, and they have to rely on almost subpar ways to be able to fight because, Hamas doesn't have, because you hear people the main argument you hear, Israel, if Israel wanted to wipe Palestine off the map, they would do it tomorrow, which is true, but from
theory,
no, even in theory, just in reality they could do it, but it's not politically advantageous to do that, right?
And it's not moral either, man.
It's not moral or politically advantageous to be able to do that, right? So, but here's the thing: if you look, for example, I don't know if you ever heard of the Deir Yassin massacre. So let's look at our screen there. So this is it took place in April 9th, 1948, when around 130 fighters from the Zionist paramilitary group Oregon and Lehigh killed at least 107 Palestinian Arab villagers, including women and children in Deir Yassin. A village of roughly 600 people near Jerusalem, despite having earlier agreed to a peace pact.
Right.
The massacre occurred while Jewish militia sought to relieve the blockade of Jerusalem during the Civil War that preceded the end of the British rule in Palestine. So you can see that when the kind of the Jewish or Zionist armies, whatever you want to call it, when they didn't have the means and ways to be able to wage traditional war, they resorted to the same exact kind of tactics that you see the Palestinians resorting to today. Right? And a lot of this stuff was also kind of like on the hush-hush. Nobody really ever talks about it. Like, for example, somebody like you who is very knowledgeable about the fact seems surprised that we're talking about this. So, right? So look at it. So, so the village put up stiffer resistance than the Jewish militias had expected, and it suffered casualties, but it fell after hours of house-to-house fighting. Literally what happened here. Some of the Palestinian Arab villagers were killed in the course of the battle, while others were massacred by the Jewish militias while trying to flee or surrender. A number of Palestinian Arab prisoners were executed, some after being paraded in West Jerusalem, where they were jeered, spat at, stoned, looted, and eventually murdered. In addition to the killing and widespread looting, there may have been cases of mutilation and rape. Literally the same exact thing that we're seeing right now, right? But it goes to show you that when a small group of people does not have the means and ways to wage traditional war, they resort to these kind of tactics. And it's not just a one-sided thing. Right?
So first and foremost, I will say this. During the War of Independence at that time, you had small little para-militia groups, right? So the IDF wasn't unified as the way that it is today. You had the Haganah, and then you had other different little factions. Oregon and whatnot. So unfortunately, did some atrocities happen during that war? Absolutely, it did. And it's a very, very sad thing that something like that absolutely happened. Because even at that time, people say, well, there was 700,000 people that left or that were displaced. They're always thinking, well, it was always, in the event of something like this, which is not true, because a lot of this is my a lot of them actually left because you're caught in a war zone, right? So when you're caught in a war zone, naturally speaking, you're like, I'm gonna get I gotta swear on this, right?
Yeah, you can. I
gotta get the fuck out of the way.
We're deep down into the show now, so YouTube does not mind swearing, at least as long as it's not within the first 10 minutes of the show.
We gotta get the fuck out of the way. But also, the Arab leaders were actually calling on all. I say Palestinians like this, not to be disrespectful or anything, but at that time, they were not referred to as Palestinians. They were the Arabs, because they were one big Arab league. It was an Arab body at that time. They were telling all the Arabs that for them to evacuate and leave, clear out the area, so that way our armies can come in and we can wipe out all the Zionists. That's where a lot of the displacement happened. Now, with something like this, yes, I mean, it is an atrocity. It is absolutely horrible. But then again, Ben Gurion, when he became prime minister,
he kind of wrote out that plan, though. He
also cleaned house with the IDF. There was people that he killed within the IDF that he executed that were just not unified in terms of
but just to kind of stick to the point that we're talking about, like, do you see how, like, because the one thing that pro-Israel defenders in the mainstream media state is the fact that somehow the fact that Israel can use their air force and all this type, quote unquote, wage what's called traditional war, right? But do you see the point I'm trying to make is when Israel was not capable or had the means to wage traditional war, it resorted to terrorism as well. Right? Like, if you look at that, like, literally the same exact
King
thing.
David
Like,
Hotel, by the way, you know the King David Hotel?
Yeah.
So before 1947, the terrorists were the Jews. We were the ones that were bombing the hotels. We were we were the ones that were but ultimately it was to get the British out of there. It wasn't even against the Arabs.
But that's what I'm saying. Why? Because the British were a much more powerful
force. We saw them as the colonial force.
Exactly. Right.
So we saw that as decolonization.
Right.
Get out of our land.
Right. But is this so? Just to circle back is when you look at the means. Listen, again, I am in no way justifying the killing or agreeing. But like, what I'm trying to show is the smaller guy, like maybe to use it as an analogy, is it's like looking at David versus Goliath, and looking at David and being like, I can't believe he's using a slingshot. Right? He's a smaller guy. He can't go toe to toe on the sword fight with Goliath. But that's why he has to kind of take his distance and toss that rock, right? Slingshots back then, were used to that was a sheep farmer type of tactic. You know what I mean? That was not an honorable. So what I'm saying is, like, when Israel was in a position where they're fighting a much bigger force, which was the English, to kick them out of their land, they resorted to means and ways that today are looked at as subpar or terroristic, right? So when you look at when you look at the way that the Hamas or Hezbollah, the way that they approach these things is when you don't have the means to wage traditional war, how else are you able to defend yourself or get your point across when conversation is no longer a
now
means?
We have to ask ourselves this question: What is the ultimate endpoint to any war? Are we going to wage a war from now until continuum of time, or are we waging a war so that we can have peace one day, right? And the question is this: even with all the wars and everything happening, who has been coming to the table to actually want that peace? Who has been coming to actually want to have the peace and not continue this violence, right?
Yes, no, you're right.
So even with the terrorists and stuff like that, so we had the international community came in 1947. They said, okay, we're going to chop up a UN partition plan, split up the land. At least hopefully we'll have peace.
Yeah.
The Jews said yes. The Arabs said no. They said, no, we're not.
No, but Nathan, when you come to the table, right? When you come to the table and we're here to negotiate peace on how to divide this land.
Sure.
But at the same time, your settlers keep growing in numbers in disputed land. I'm sorry, that does not sound like it doesn't sound like good faith negotiation, right? Like if we're gonna sit down and be like, okay, Israel is on the table. Yeah. We're ready to negotiate. Yeah. But as we're negotiating, your settlements are getting bigger in that same disputed land. It doesn't sound like we're having an actual honest negotiation here. You're doing what you want. We're gonna move the line, and then what's gonna happen is you're gonna go back to the lines where you were before and look like you made some concessions.
Right. And it's always been a bargaining chip, right away. So if we go back to 1967 when the 6-Day War, when Israel won the 6-Day War, and they didn't annex, because annex means basically taking it. Quick side note, by the way, and I do want to mention this, and nobody likes to talk about this, but from 1948 to 1967, who actually had authority in the West Bank and who actually had authority in Gaza? Jordan was occupying the West Bank. Jordan was a completely different country. Right. Nobody was complaining when they were on the occupation of the Jordans, right? Why didn't they create a state right there and then? And also, you had a chance to make a state, but you didn't, right?
So okay, so say that part again.
So from 1948 to 1967, who were the occupiers at the time? Jordan occupied the West Bank,
right,
and Egypt occupied Gaza,
right.
Jordan was a different country at this time. They already established their own independence. They weren't the West Bank, right?
Right, yeah.
The Jordanian army came in and began to occupy it.
One second.
From 1948 to 1967, I always ask, why did the Palestinians not create a state? They had the opportunity to have their own state at that time, but they didn't. Nobody gives slack to the Jordanians that they were occupying them or under occupation, nor was it anything with Egypt when they had Gaza. Anyways, so 1967, Israel won the defensive war. They ended up taking that land. And yes, as a bargaining chip, there says, you know what, for future negotiations, hopefully for peace, we'll do land swaps. We'll exchange land back that we conquered,
right,
in hopes of guarantees of peace, guarantee of security. Meaning that if we do give you back this land,
right,
you're not going to try to freaking kill us. Right. Ultimately, like that's always been our thing. It's like we're willing to have peace. We want to give you guys back the land. Just we want to know that you don't want to kill us. When we hear river to the sea, Palestine will be free. In our minds, and a lot of our Jewish friends have family that came from the Holocaust. It's basically to wipe the Jews completely out of the land. That usually leads to genocide, which is, by the way, kind of like we got a little bit of a snapshot of what that kind of looks like this past Saturday.
Right.
So it's call it paranoia, call it whatever you want. We just want a guarantee of peace. So in terms of the settlements and stuff, yes. But here's the thing: every Israeli prime minister, whether it's Menachem Begin or Ariel Sharon or even Netanyahu, have said that we are willing to give up the land for peace.
This is probably the most right wing. Government that Israel has had in quite some time. A little bit, yeah. You know what I mean? Because Elliot, was it Ariel Sharon? Was it Sharon who moved all occupants of Jewish occupants of Gaza because he was he pulled them out kind of thing.
Gaza experiment.
Yeah. So. Just to kind of just circle back to what we're talking about. So, to me, when we say that we want peace, right? Like the portion of Gaza, what do you call people who live in Gaza? Gazawits,
Gazians,
Palestinians, man. Palestinians, right?
Are,
right? Yeah. So. To me, the way I look at it, I'm like, what would give some it can't be just what will make somebody cross through, walk into a neighborhood and massacre women and children, right? To me, when I look at it, if the idea is to keep peace, right? If the idea is to keep peace or create a more peaceful existence,
right?
If I was a young man, I lost everybody I love, right? If everybody I love was killed, mutilated, and there is obviously this Hamas comes and they're like, you know what, we're gonna avenge your loved ones and all this type of thing. Because think about if you're in that position, think about how angry you are now, right? Think about how angry you are. So all this back and forth is doing is radicalizing more people. That's gonna create, because think about the children in Gaza right now who have lost everybody.
Very
I don't give a damn about peace. I want every Jew that I can get my hands on. It's on site kind of thing, right? And it's the same thing that the Jewish people are feeling. Imagine, I was watching.
Thing, yeah,
right? Yeah, exactly. Yeah, Israel. Imagine the Israelis. Like I was watching, like a man who his wife and his 2 daughters, got murdered in a house, and he managed to survive. That guy has no interest in peace going forward. And the more this thing fucking goes on and on and on and on, you're gonna have more radicalized people and less chances of being able to talk.
What do you think the solution is, Robbie? I mean, ultimately, from your standpoint.
Honestly, man, like to me, the way I look at it is like I can't see, because it's this vicious cycle where, first of all, okay, I'll give you an example. Okay, so where I come from, right? Like what? Like I in Rwanda, right? The genocide in '94 was a civil war, right? But what caused the civil? So just to give you a brief background, so Rwanda used to be a German colony, right? Before World War I, right? So the way the Germans kind of ran, so at that time, Rwanda was consisted of two major ethnicities: the Tutsis and the Hutus.
Right.
The Hutus were 90% of the population. The Tutsis were 10%, but the Tutsis were cattle farmers. At that time, cattle was a sign of wealth, so they kind of ran everything, right? Like kings had been Tutsis for as long as the land had been around, and Hutus were fine with it, right? They were more kind of like the agricultural farmers, etc., right? Fast forward to the end of World War I, just how Palestine get divided up. Rwanda was one of those countries that used to be a German colony. Now suddenly becomes a Belgian protectorate. Now, the way the Germans ran the show, they were very kind of laissez-faire, hands back, right? Mm-hmm. They would come in, they take their minerals and all this type of stuff, whatever they needed. They did not get involved into local politics. When the Belgians came in, it was a whole complete different conversation. First of all, they were like, you know what? Meet Jesus, nigga. You know what I mean? They're like, here is Jesus, is your Lord and Savior now. And of course, like Rwanda was one of those like little rebellious like African countries, because it's, for example, one of the very few countries in Africa that completely refused to participate in slavery, right? So the Belgians were having a hard time kind of pinning down that Tutsi, the Tutsis, right? So the Belgians, what they did, traditional divide and conquer. They go to the Hutus, they're like, listen, you guys are 90% of the population. Why are you letting these little skinny niggas run you? You know what I mean? You guys should be running things, da-da-da-da. Hutus are like, word? This is how things are supposed to be? So then fast forward to 1959, we get our independence. Hutus now start killing the Tutsis, right? And the kids of those Tutsis, the kids of those Tutsis end up migrating. So Tutsis are now, there's a major migration, right? About 30 years later, in the 90s, the children of those Tutsi refugees now organize into an army, and they decide to attack the country. The Hutus realize that if they go in a one-on-one war with the Tutsi army, they're gonna lose, because these motherfuckers been eating mosquitoes in the jungle for however long. Right. They're hard-headed. Right. You know what I mean? Right. These dudes been getting fat on margarine there for the last 30 years. Right. They're not ready for a one-on-one kind of situation. Yeah, they might be a little slow, a little bit of a beer gut. Yeah. Right? You know what they did? So Rwanda at that time, again, same thing like Gaza. Majority of the population was under 25. Very poor country. You have all these young men who are very antsy, very poor. And then you also have the government control of information. Right. So the Hutus go to these young men and they're like, listen, the Tutsis are coming. They're gonna steal your land. They're gonna rape your wives. They're gonna do this. They're gonna do this. They're gonna do that. Now these kids are heated up, right? So they elicited these young men who created these militias and started going door to door killing Tutsis, right? But the issue with that was a control of information, right? So when you create this type of situation where, but see what happens at the end of the war, when the Tutsis finally won the war, what they did is they knew that kind of doing this revenge thing against the Hutus will perpetrate this kind of cycle of violence, right? So to me, the way I look at it, even though yes, Israel has every right to defend itself, and it should, indiscriminately bulldozing everything is actually going to put you in a much more dangerous situation, because all you're doing is creating more and more people who are going to be
More jaded.
more jaded and
whatnot,
more
right?
willing
Okay.
to do unsavory things. Because if I lost my mother and if I lost my mother and my loved ones in one shot, I'm sorry, man, I'm not willing to conversate about anything.
Right.
You know what I mean? So it's gonna create this constant cycle of violence.
Right.
Right?
And by the way, I mean, you could say the same thing with the Israelis too, because I
Right.
mean, by the way, this is not the first time that a Jewish massacre has happened in this conflict. I mean,
Right.
when we talk about, like, for instance, even the Second Intifada,
Yeah.
which is between 2000 and 2005. I mean, on a daily basis, you were having buses being blown up by suicide bombers. You had pizza shops being blown up, cafes. Everybody in Israel, they know somebody who has been affected by this conflict in one way,
Right.
shape, or form, right? So the trauma goes pretty deep. The thing is, though, man, is that the fish rots from the head. So what I mean by that, the head of whatever, any sort of body, country, a group, is going to be the direction where that body is moving, right? So we got to ask ourselves this question: who is the head of each side, right? What is their intentions? What's their aspirations? What is really, like, what's driving them? What's influencing them? I told you I didn't want to bring religion into this.
Yeah,
right?
no,
But-
if you must, because there is a big religion component to
But
this
I will
whole
say
thing.
this, though, because anybody that's actually going to take a look at this conflict and ignore the fact that there's a blanket of religion that is covering this conflict.
No, you can't.
There's a blanket or an undercurrent that is driving the motivations, that is driving a lot of the reasons.
So let me ask you a question. Speaking of the religion, like,
Yeah.
where do you stand about like when you hear, for example, like extreme colonists in Israel saying, like, this is our promised land, this is land that we're given. Do you really believe that God is also happens to be a real estate developer who's assigning land?
It's the deal of all
Like,
deals,
you know what I mean, it's a pretty sweet fucking deal. You know what I mean? To you and to your descendants, like, because see, to me, like, especially too, like when you say that, like, oh, okay, it's in the Torah, it's in the Bible. Yeah, it's also the same book that says that in Deuteronomy 23:13 that if your wife is not a virgin on her wedding day, you have the right to stone her in front of her father's doorstep. So we cannot pick and choose, be like, okay, you know what? We're not gonna stone the women, but the land, no, that's official. That we cannot discuss.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying?
But also, I would let's put the other side too, right? Because then people don't really understand some of the Muslim theology when it comes to Muslim conquered land, right? So it's in the Quran that basically once a caliphate has made dominion over a particular land, it can never go back to the kafirs. It can never go back to the unbelievers. That there will always have to be a nonstop jihad in order to secure and maintain that land. So and by the way, Jerusalem is the hot topic. You want to talk about, like, the real estate of all real estate?
Yeah. So, like,
On planet Earth, it always is Jerusalem, right? Because we have the Temple Mount, which is the holiest place for Jews for millennia now, and for the Muslims, it's the third holiest place, which is the Al-Aqsa Mosque, right? Where the Prophet Muhammad ascended to heaven, made his pilgrimage from Mecca all the way to Jerusalem. And so, yeah, it's a hot button, right? So as Muslims, they see, well, no, we can't give this land to anybody because this is our sacred land, and then the Jews obviously see this as our sacred land as well. But this is why I try to I'll keep the religion in this to know what's
but you
driving
can't keep the religion out of it, though.
Out of it, I get
you know what
it.
I mean?
But to make the case why, I don't say by the way, in Genesis 16, when God promised Abraham the land and everything, I don't use that as the case for why Israel should exist. But I understand that would be the driving force of why the Jews see
again, listen,
but
see, again, I don't think anybody is denying that Israel should exist. Is the thing is, like, it's because remember, they had a choice. I think there were discussions of moving the state of Israel to either Argentina or Uganda. And they were looking at all these places, but the reason why they specifically picked that land is because there was this kind of like this biblical this biblical connection
but
to
also
it.
Historical, by the way, we're talking about historical because we had a kingdom there for 1,000 years.
Right.
It's not like it was just like, in this book it said that we're gonna get this land and we're like, hey, we have our deed over there.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
That's what it's
like, no, dude. Like, we built Jerusalem, right? Like, Jerusalem was like established by King David. Solomon had his first temple there. By the way, a lot of ancient cities like Nablus. I mean, it was called Shrem before. That was a Jewish city. So like there is Bethlehem, right? The Galilee, right? So these things existed prior to in terms of establishment. The thing is for me, man. The thing is for me is that once again, we're looking at religion to see what is the motivating influence to what drives people, right? Now we have to ask ourselves this question when we're looking at both sides now.
Mhm.
Okay, we got an Israeli side, we got a Palestinian side. What is the Israelis' goals?
Mhm.
What is their end goal in this conflict? I know we could put the extremism element and stuff like that. The
Right.
beautiful thing about Israel is that it is a secular democracy.
Mhm.
We're not governing it as a religious government, right? It's
Mhm.
not under Jewish law, meaning that if you're that's why we have gay pride parades and
Mhm.
stuff like that, right? Or else people would be getting stoned
Yeah.
in that case,
Why
right?
did I laugh so hard at that? I
Yeah,
don't
well,
know.
you
You know?
might have to.
Hey, I want to know what that says about me.
But
Yeah.
ultimately,
Mhm.
yeah, we might have that. But the beautiful thing is that the essence of what Israel is as a secular humanist, secular democracy, that stands. And the goal is, I mean, ever since the very beginning, is just to have peace. When we look at it on the other side, what is their goals? What is their aspirations?
Mhm.
What is their end goal with this, right?
Mhm.
From what I've seen it now, I might be biased in this. Maybe if somebody Palestinian or whatever can tell me differently, but I see it over when it's on social media, and I've seen it from history, from all the different wars, the conflicts, time and time again, that one side would like to have peace, which has multiple times come to the table to negotiate that peace, and
Mhm.
the other one says their negotiating position is you guys all die.
Yeah, no, for sure. But again, because if you again just looking at both sides, right? Like, and I know, like, we kind of like we'll be kind of going in circles, just going to be like, okay, it's one thing to come to the negotiation table, but if you're not coming in good faith, then
Yeah.
what are we looking at? But
Yeah.
going back to the religious aspect of it, to me, like, there is just something like whenever religion is used as a justification for anything, I get lost immediately. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, just the same way, like, you know what I mean?
And
Like,
most of the world does too,
right?
by
Like,
the way.
like, I grew up Catholic. Being told that every Sunday some guy in a robe, you know what I mean, is gonna, every Sunday there is a guy in a robe who stands in a room full of people and takes a cracker, says some Latin words on it, it becomes the body of some first century carpenter. But if I take a stack of pancakes and call it the body of Elvis Presley, Rob is drinking again. Right. So obviously, you know what I mean? There is a lot there, right? So I don't like, like, again, just to say that that's somebody arguing the fact that the claim over that land is more than anything, no matter how you wanna flip
And
it.
it's small, too.
The claim on that land
bro.
is very religiously based above all else, right?
Yeah.
Yes, I understand that you're right, that, you know what I mean, like but it's the same way, like, the natives could be like, you know what, when this land was called Chippewa, we built this and that, right? There is no denying that region has greatly benefited from Jewish presence. Absolutely. Like you said, before the Jews showed up, that place, there was not a whole lot going on. You know what I mean? But again, like, I don't know if that could be justification, because you have to understand, like, how do we get Palestinians to understand? People, right, especially people who grew up in this era where they've always felt victimized, and everybody they know, because people band together in struggle.
Right.
You know what I mean? So again, going forward, let me ask you a question. What do you think will be the actual perfect solution here? Do you think a two-state solution is even possible? Because to me, the way I look at it, a two-state solution is not possible until there is a clear and complete stop of any more settlements of Israel, which is not going to happen, because now, you're not going to put 400,000 Israelis back towards the line, giving up their homes, because, they're not living there in tents. They have their schools, they have families and all that stuff. Yeah. A single-state solution, obviously, it's not, the assimilation of Arabs into Israeli society is not something that can happen. So where do we go from here?
So I'm going to ask you a really hot button question just a little bit later after this. But ultimately, I think one of the biggest problems is that we've been relying too much on the political side of things. Mm-hmm. And I feel like in order for Israelis and Palestinians to truly come together, they have to stop seeing each other as the enemy, right? And this has to happen more on the ground level, where these type of conversations are important,
right?
But what's more important is actually for Israelis and Palestinians. I'm not talking about like just the Arabs in Israel, which live really well, by the way. I mean, like I said, they're granted. I mean, as an Arab, if you're living in Israel, you can serve on the Knesset, you can serve as a parliament, as a judge, a doctor. I mean, tell me where else where you can have an Arab judge sentence an Israeli Jewish prime minister to jail. And I know that there's words that are floating around like apartheid state and colonial settlements and those type of look, guys, Israel is not an apartheid state. I mean, old people. When you have an apartheid like South Africa, right? There's two class of people. Now, if you want to say the Israelis and Palestinians
Right.
have different status,
Right.
right? I get that because we're in a conflict, the same way that Ukrainians and Russians would have.
No, okay, but look at the situation in the West Bank where you specifically have an area where you have certain neighborhoods that have,
Correct.
you know, what I mean, better funding, better schools, better hospitals, and then across the road, it's a whole complete different, like, you know what I mean?
Because I mean,
but it's they have to live under
civilians,
Israeli
civilians under two different jurisdictions, really, because Palestinians are under the PLO and the Israelis are under Israel. If an Arab went and became Israeli and they got an Israeli passport, they would be granted the exact same rights as any other Israeli, whether they're Jew or Christian. But I do want to answer your question. How do we see things moving forward? I think it's important that each side, you know, you said something a little bit earlier in the show when you're talking about echo chambers, right? People are just so caught up in their own narrative and their own echo chamber of things. They kind of fail to, you know, I don't know whether it's, you know, hardness of heart or maybe it's cognitive dissonance in a lot of ways, but I think it's important that both Israelis and Palestinians begin to understand the suffering, you know, understand the misery of what the other person is going through, to understand what is their struggle. Like, what is their struggle, right? I know the Israelis kind of seem like it was like, oh, they never struggled or anything like that. But if you really understand Jewish history and if you understand Jewish pain and suffering, I mean, this is what they fail to grasp sometimes. And also Israelis fail to grasp that with the Palestinians because they become very jaded. They become very you know, in their own Israeli echo chamber. So they're not paying attention to what's going on in Gaza or West Bank or the case be.
Right.
And I think it's important that they understand what each one's aspirations are and ultimately what each other's, you know, what their own self-determination looks like. What is a Palestinian state? What does its self-determination look like? What does an Israeli state look like? But if one side thinks that it's going to get rid of the other, it's not going to happen.
It's not going to happen.
It's just not. It's not. And it's a pipe dream at this point because the reality is there are Israelis that live in the land, multiple generations, and there's Palestinians that live in that land. One is not going to replace the other.
Right.
I don't think that's the way to go. I think that it's time, and this is probably going to take a generation or two to happen, for them to really start understanding each other's plight, struggle, and ultimately working towards each other's self-determination.
So just in conclusion, you know, you meant, you know, you like going back to the events of last Saturday, right?
Yeah.
So there's a few theories. One is that this was a failure of intelligence, which for me it's very hard to grasp because I mean, you have Mossad, you have CIA, you have like you know you have the English. All these people are very active in that area. You're telling me that you know, the Gaza Strip, which is under blockade, meaning no weapons can come in. So because I'm trying to understand, these people did not just all send each other. This was not like a group chat type of situation. They're like, yo, by the way, on Saturday, be ready. And then they're flying into Israel. They're coming in like knowing exactly which telecommunication infrastructure to be able to destroy. So, excuse me, I don't see how Mossad had no idea, right? How did these weapons get into Gaza? How is it that like this is not this? They had to train to be able to pull something like that off.
Right.
How is that possible? So there is that one theory, right? And then there is another theory that it's another like a lot of conspiracy theorists look at it and when they say like, you know what? Maybe the Israeli government kind of wanted this to happen as a way to justify going into Gaza because there was that whole situation of I don't know if you saw this video of Netanyahu in front of the UN with this map of Israel that had completely annexed everything. Right? So looking at it as like, hey, you know what? Maybe the Israelis wanted this to happen as a way to justify complete and utter annexation of everything around them. Right?
Yeah.
So what do you think it lands? Do you think it could be some sort of like nefarious actors on both ends, or is it just a failure of intelligence?
So I don't like to always chalk up malice where incompetence can be due, right? So a lot of the times we think that people, you know, even in our own personal lives, right? We think that they're doing something like horrible or malicious, but really they're just incompetent. They're just like kind of being stupid.
Right.
The thing is with the Mossad, even though it's one of the most advanced intelligence agencies in the world, listen, when you desperation breeds innovation, right? So I mean, this is nothing new with Hamas or any of the enemies of Israel. I mean, they've always been finding, once we figure out one thing, they'll figure out another way to do it, right? Before we knew about terror tunnels, they figured out how to do terror tunnels. Before they figured out how to send out paragliders, but they were selling like balloons with like incendiary bombs and stuff like that, right? So this operation, as from what the IDF has released, is that this operation has actually been planned for since 2022, right?
Wow.
So we're talking about a year, right, in planning and strategizing.
No, this was not like an overnight kind of,
right? And it kind of reminds me of the Yom Kippur War, right? When in 1973, once again, Israel was caught off guard. It was the end of Sukkot and it was a Sabbath, right? So it was the end of a high holiday and it was into the Sabbath day, where mostly, on days like that, the military's told, yeah, you know what, some of you guys can go home, go spend time with your family. They just found a real weak point and was able to capitalize on it. Same thing with the Iron Dome too. Like, they got smart enough when they realized, oh wait, there's an Achilles heel of the Iron Dome. You can actually over volume it, and that's what they did. They send something like what, 7,000 7,000 rockets, 6,000 rockets, something like that. Just to give you guys context, everyone remembers 2021. Everybody remembers when they were spitting bullets or rockets at one another. In the same period, in 10 days that Hamas sent rockets, was the same period that they did in one day. Just to show you so it was like it was like condensed into one day, the amount they did in a 10-day period. That's how overwhelming that was, right? I don't necessarily, I don't go into the conspiracies because I do like to stay factual, because we go into like rabbit holes at that point,
right?
But I really just think that it was the same thing that happened in 1973.
But how do you feel about this idea of Netanyahu being in front of the UN with that map? Do you feel like that might have been something that might have aggravated the situation a lot more than it should have?
Could have aggravated it, yeah.
Right.
Definitely. I
mean, nothing justifies the killing of innocent women and children, but I think if somebody who wants peace, if the main objective of the Israeli government is to create peace in the region, showing up in front of the UN with a map that says this is the new Middle East, that is not conducive to the peace that. You know what I mean?
Can I ask you a question? This is the hot button question. Remember I told you I had the hot button question? Okay. Yeah. So from 1948, 1967, 1973, the First Intifada, the Second Intifada, all the Gazan wars from 2006, 2007, 2014, 2021, and now we're dealing with this situation in 2023. Every single time the Arabs ended up getting the short end of that conflict, meaning that they ended up losing each one, right? In the sense that in 1948 they lost, 67 they lost, 73 they lost. First Intifada ended bad. Second Intifada, that's where the walls and the checkpoints started coming in. The situation got worse and worse and worse. Israel to this day has not started a single war. It has not started a single war. It was never been the aggressor. Now you could say, well, listen, they're coming in, taking the home.
Right.
Listen, bro, there's a big difference between, we're talking about real estate disputes versus you coming with arms trying to, basically kill the other person.
But like we don't want to water that down to just a real estate dispute. This is deeper than that, right? Like it is.
My question to you is this, right? And this is the hard question to ask. At what point do the Palestinians lose the ability to get a state at this point? When it's become so hostile. I don't like the zero-sum game.
Right.
But if you see the situation where it's like, we try to make peace with you guys, every time you guys start war, you end up losing the war. It gets worse. It gets worse. It gets worse. At what point, you says the hopes and the dreams of having a Palestinian state, at what point it's like you've kind of the window has closed at this point. It's time to assimilate you guys either into Israel or get assimilated into Egypt or Jordan or everywhere else. I know it's a really politically incorrect.
I think, question. But see, here's what I think on that matter. I think the Palestinians
lose the opportunity to have their own state. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. So again, right. So I think the Palestinians have they're like, I think the regular day-to-day Palestinian. He wants just what the day-to-day Israeli wants. Just live in peace. You know what I mean? Have your rights, have them defended, etc. But I feel like now, in a globalist world that we live in, this has overflowed beyond just the existence of a Palestinian state. I think there is too many nefarious actors in the game, like Iran and you know what I mean, like
US, bro.
Like US, the Iran, US, you know what I mean, like countries like like Lebanon and stuff like that, where there is so much, like the world is so much smaller now, where it's not just about that Palestine area, and civilians are getting the brunt of it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I feel like you were saying, I think that's going to come down to is you're going to need to like, but even then, like, what do you see? Like, what are the next generation? Like, tell me the next, like, how many generations is it going to take for these people in Gaza today to look back and be like, okay, you know what? Because in at this place now, like, the moment you kind of gather your thoughts together, all you're thinking about is revenge, and it's gonna be this kind of vicious cycle. How long is it gonna take the Israelis there now to be able to forget what has happened today?
Yeah, it's not even.
You know what I mean?
Like,
So,
time does heal all. I will say that I think that when people's lives are being good and it's being prosperous, and they actually have some sort of like economic mobility in their life, and they can, they can actually have an opportunity to somewhat build a better life. Even though we got problems, it's just war is not good for business, kind of thing, right?
Exactly.
And this is what we're seeing right now with Israel, with Saudi Arabia, even the Abraham Accords, right?
Yeah.
When you see the UAE has and Egypt have naturalized relations, they realize, you know what? Maybe war is not really that good. Maybe it's better just to do business so we can all prosper at the end of the day.
And that's why Saudi Arabia
and Palestinians are not there yet. They're still in a place where they're so, and I get it, so marginalized, where it's like the only thing, it's like the only upward mobility is violence, it is revenge, it is these things. So,
or just see to whatever Israel is Israel is demanding, because like you said, like, if people are able to provide a good life for themselves and their children, they're less likely to be inclined to war. But when you live in Gaza, where you have a total blockade that makes it impossible to be able to conduct business, that makes it impossible. And that's what I was telling you when I used the example of my country. The reason why you can get a group of young men to indiscriminately murder a million of their neighbors is because there is no prospect for advancement. So when you put people in a position where they feel like there is nothing beyond this, that's when the Hamas of this world comes in and is like, hey, look what these people have done. Look at the way we're living. And there is nothing else to look at and be like, there is prospect for hope there.
Well, here's the thing.
Right?
Hamas only came into Gaza after Israel pulled out of Gaza. So they actually pulled out the settlements in 2005. Hamas was elected in 2006. At that time, the IDF...
But Hamas or whoever else, right? Like, he's going to be like,
what I'm saying is they had the opportunity for their own autonomy within Gaza. Hamas comes into power. Look, dude, I mean, at the end of the day, like, even Germany in the 1930s, it was pretty advanced. I mean, we wouldn't say it was a second world or third world country.
No.
But once again, when the fish rots from the head, when you have a leadership that's going to lead you to destruction, it's going to lead you to destruction. Same thing with the Soviet Union, with Stalin and all the different leaders of the Soviet Union. You had Khrushchev and Brezhnev and things like that sort. Look, dude, the way that I see it, it's we gotta, and the Palestinians need to ask this question: like, who the fuck is actually leading us right now?
Yeah,
like, who's leading us?
Yeah,
are they leading us to more death and destruction?
Right.
Even if it's vengeance and how much we justified it, are they leading us to a more prosperous life, or is the conditions only getting worse and worse and worse?
Right.
So right now, just to bring this down to today, right now, what day is it? October 13th. October 13th, by the way, is when we're filming. Just if you guys know anything about that, but for the future people watching this in like a year or two, right? Just look up October 13th, 2023, see if there was anything significant on that day. But anyways, what I see is that Israel's duty right now for itself, but even more for the Palestinians, is to get rid of Hamas. Because Hamas does not have the Palestinians don't have the capability to get rid of Hamas themselves. They can't elect them out. They can't get them out by force or might. But clearly this leadership is leading their people to death and destruction, right? I mean, you can even see the contrast. Look at Mahmoud Abbas in the West Bank, the PLO. I'm not saying that they don't share similar, they're not kindred spirits in a lot of ways when it comes to their, what they want ultimately but you can tell that at least Mahmoud Abbas is taking a little bit more of a diplomatic approach,
right,
rather than a militaristic point, which, by the way, like you even said it yourself, Israel is one of the strongest armies in the world. You're bringing sticks and stones to a nuclear battle, right? Like, I mean, the knife to a gunfight kind of thing. Wouldn't it be kind of smarter to be like, well, this is all they can do to fight? Well, what did it do for you in the first place? No, and I mean this to any free Palestinian sympathizer or anything like that. Let me ask you, what happened right now with Hamas? What did it really provide? Did it provide free Palestine? Did it provide more opportunities for the Palestinians? Did it break anything, in terms of the cycle of the misery that they're in? Like, really ask yourself this question. Or even in 2021 or in 2018, did any of this lead to more prosperity? Did any of this lead to more freedom? Freedom fighters, right? But like to be called a freedom fighter, there has to be more freedom that comes out of it, not less, right? I mean, when you look at the U.S. Revolutionary War, right? You had the U.S. Revolutionary War. Those were freedom fighters. Did we have the same type of violence and atrocities? Mahatma Gandhi was a freedom fighter. Did he have the same level of atrocities? Martin Luther King, once again, didn't even during his things.
Yeah,
right?
but history is written by the winners, right? Like if the Americans have lost that revolution, they would have been looked at as terrorists,
right?
Who were squashed, you know, and the narrative would have been painted by the English.
So the question,
you know what I mean?
The question is this: who is leading you ultimately? Are they leading towards peace? You know, people are saying, well, you know, Hamas, they're freedom fighters. Well, you know what? I say Israel, we're peace fighters. We're fighting for peace ultimately. And so the thing that we want to do is that we want to get rid of Hamas. There is no negotiating with evil, guys. I'm sorry. I'm not taking there's no like half-ass approach. Evil is evil. Like if you got a cancer in you, right? Like you got a cancer in you, you're not trying to negotiate with the evil, right? Like you're not going to put a fence on the evil. I say Hamas, by the way, and I'm not saying Palestinians. I'm saying specifically the bodying power of Hamas. If you got a cancer in you, you're not like, all right, just stay in the liver. You know, you got a tumor.
But see, using that same analogy, right? Because I like the fact that you made that distinction between Palestinian people and Hamas.
Yeah, I want to make that clear.
But indiscriminately bombing entire blocks of town and killing thousands and thousands of civilians. It's like being told that you got lung cancer and then picking up on your smoking habit. Because what you're doing, you know what I mean? If what you're looking to do is eradicate down cancer, you don't keep smoking some more growing down cancer, because all you're doing now is out of that 2 million people, you might as well have done a recruiting event for Hamas, because that's all that happened, right? So again, like you said, if you're looking to eradicate Hamas and create peace in the area, you don't go on slaughtering people indiscriminately and then being like, we want peace, because all you just did is just create more freedom fighters or whatever they call themselves.
Yeah, so
right?
I do want to make this very, very clear. People like to draw moral equivalence between the IDF and Hamas, and they say, well, the IDF is also terrorist. No, the IDF is not terrorist. The IDF uses every single precaution that it can to avoid civilian casualties. Now, do civilians die in the crossfire? Absolutely. It's a sad thing. We have to condemn it by every stretch of the imagination. But Israel goes to extreme lengths. Like even right now, I mean, I want to show you something, man. But even right now, when you know, I was hearing talks that Israel was not, because Israel at least sends leaflets. It makes phone calls. It says, "Get the fuck out of the way. We're coming to bomb."
That's another thing too, though. Like again, like you know, if you give one of these warnings where you have one of these like towers, there's no electricity there. They're filled with people, and you give people like what is it, like 60 seconds, 5 minutes that they get before the actual there is a small time frame.
Yeah.
Like think about like when the lights. Have you ever been inside like an apartment building and the elevators don't work and people have to go up and down the stairs?
24-hour or 2-hour?
It's not a 24-hour, man. Come on, bro. They're not giving
depends on which one. Sometimes they'll be like, clear out. Tomorrow there's going to be bombing, so they'll give like the first little one. Then they're saying, hey,
here's what they do. They do what's called roof knocking, where they would drop like this this kind of like bomb that doesn't destroy the spot, and then 5 minutes, 10 minutes later, now they bring that thing down. How long does it take to evacuate an entire building if that was the idea, right? Because like to me, like there is stuff that happens and you're like, okay, are we just showing off for the international community? Because to tell me that you expect an entire building to be evacuated, I saw that on your But we'll send it to my producer and he'll put it up.
So I got another one to show you too,
right,
really quickly. Hold on, that one. It was this one. But yeah, so Israel does all that it can in order to mitigate the civilians. But what does Hamas do? Hamas says, no, do not leave. We will keep our people there. Even right now, they went and sent out a mass message to the people. I have the screenshots when they were saying, do not listen to the Zionist occupiers. Stay wherever you are. Don't listen to the warnings or anything like that, because they also know this strategy. And this is the unfortunate part that a lot of people are not talking about. Hamas knows what they're doing. They're not stupid, because they're playing a bigger game. That's why if you ever heard of BDS, Boycott, Divest, and the Sanction Movement of Israel, what Hamas and even Mahmoud Abbas today, this is why they don't come to the negotiating table, because they don't need to negotiate. For them, they're like, we're going to put enough international pressure on Israel to reveal how cruel they are, to show them the violations of human rights, to show them basically that this state is so evil that the entire world is going to boycott them, they're going to sanction them, and they're going to divest them. So that way, Israel's just going to crumble from the inside,
bottom end,
the inside out. That is their ultimate goal. Because once again, I ask you, what is the aspirations of what they would like to accomplish? They want it all, and they say it right openly in your face. From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. They're not talking from the river to the end of the West Bank. They're not saying from the river, or not from the sea to like Ashkelon, right, where Gaza is. They're saying from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. That is the charge, which means that Israel will no longer exist. The Jews are no longer going to be in that land. I always ask a Palestinian friend, I'm like, hey, let me ask you something. Just real talk, though, like real talk. And I would ask you the same thing, bro. Real talk. Let's say just for whatever reason, Israel just drops all its arms right now. It just says, like, you know what? We surrender. We're just going to give you guys all the land right now. We're just going to give it to you guys. You guys can come in, whoever. Hamas, Mahmoud Abbas, come in, guys. You guys are going to take leadership, come into the Knesset, come into Jerusalem and stuff like that. Let me ask you something right now, bro. What's going to happen to the 7 million Jews and the 9 million Israelis that are living there right now? What would happen? If we gave them river to the sea, if they wanted that, and we just gave them, they're like, okay, listen.
No, that's
you don't even have to come in mass. You don't even have to come and fight us for it. We just dropped it. What's gonna happen?
I don't think I don't believe like ceding anything to Hamas is part of the plan. No, listen, I do not disagree with the fact that Hamas has to go, right? What I disagree with is the approach and the method with which it's being done, because what that's doing is you actually growing your enemy. You know what I'm saying? I absolutely cannot I cannot vouch for, like something like that where they're like, okay, come on. No. There will be no negotiation with terrorists. I don't believe in that. You know what I mean? Yeah, it has to be done.
Right.
But the way that it's being done is accomplishing the whole complete opposite of the I think Israel is run by very smart people who can see that.
By the way,
so when you say that, like, what the expectation is peace, but by peace you mean going out and radicalizing a gang of people who now, like if I wake up tomorrow morning and everybody I love is gone, bro, and Hamas comes to me and they're like, yo, it's time to go avenge the people you love, I don't give a shit about peace talks, bro.
Robbie, let me
you know
ask
what I mean?
This,
I could have been the most peaceful guy.
Robbie,
I could have been the nicest, most peaceful guy, but
let me ask you this though. Who are you going to be more pissed off on? Let's just say right now you got two messages, right? The situation's about to happen. The bomb is coming. You got one message, the IDF is saying, get the fuck out of there because we're about to bomb. And then you get another message.
But go where, Nathan? That's the thing.
Well, clear the area. Like, go down to the south right now. But
the south, but like there is videos of people who have left the areas that they were told to clear and to find themselves in an area that was bombed as well. Right. You know what I mean? So again, like, you can't say that, like, oh, we told them to leave, but like, they're indiscriminately like clearing, like, because we know the plan, especially to when that ground offensive starts. Right. The idea is to just completely obliterate the area. So like, to me, to tell me, like, first of all, like, where people, like, if I told you right now, like, you know what, Nathan, leave your house and go somewhere else. Right. What the fuck are you gonna go? So how do you make those arrangements?
It's a really good point, because now I'm gonna ask you another hard question. We have refugee crises all the time, right? Rwanda, you had a refugee crisis, right? Right now in Ukraine, we had a refugee crisis. There are 22 Arab Muslim countries right now. Gaza holds a border with Egypt right now. Why does Egypt not create a corridor for refugees? Clearly, there's refugee crisis.
Because I'll tell you why. Because Egypt, their problem with Egypt is the fact that Hamas is in very close ties with the Muslim Brotherhood, and the Muslim Brotherhood has been giving a lot, because the previous regime in Egypt was open to the idea because they were very close to Hamas. The new military dictatorship in Egypt doesn't want these fucking guys coming into the land creating all kinds of disturbance. That's why they closed it off. You know what I mean? But like, again, like, all that taken into consideration, right? If I'm Israel and my goal is peace, right? Go in there, find those Hamas motherfuckers. Go ahead and obliterate them, absolutely. But indiscriminately killing, you know what I mean, like tens of thousands of civilians all you're doing is recruiting more people into
Robbie,
Hamas and creating
why
the
is there
same.
not more international pressure? Like, it also has a sea there, right?
Right.
Why doesn't Iraq or why doesn't maybe Morocco or Algeria provide ships that they can come and bring people out? So
Yeah,
that way they
yeah.
can start evacuating people. What I'm saying is that there is not enough international pressure from the Arab world. Like, these are your brothers and sisters, okay?
Right.
There's only one Jewish state, okay? Like, there's 22 Arab Muslim countries. There is no accountability that is put on the bigger community. It's always Israel, 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 Israel. Look, guys, Israel can only do so much. At the same time, we're also in a time-sensitive situation because we have a hostage situation.
Right.
Right? Like, bro, we got babies, we got elderly, we got people that we need to come and rescue.
Right.
Yes, they cut off the supplies. They cut off all the supplies, the water and everything like that. Which, by the way, I know it's a hot take right now, I do agree with.
So here's another thing too. So what do you think is going to happen with the, because that's also too when I wonder, like, when Israel goes and bombs Gaza to the way that it is, what's happening with your hostages? You know what I mean? Like, what is the plan here? Are they supposed? Are they gonna be rescued? Like, how many of those were killed by Israel's own bombs? Don't you think that there are probably some that probably died because of
actually they did. It was about 2 or 3, right? So I mean, look, dude, I mean, you're dealing with one of the most densest populations in the world, and you know, as much advanced as it is, there's going to be some collateral. I don't like saying it, but it's just the reality of the fact, right? We're not living in a la la land utopia. Here's the fact of the matter, man. The hostages can be released, and the Gazans could have water, food supply. Israel said it very clear: if you release the hostages, we'll turn on the power. You release the hostages, now it's on Hamas's hands. Do you guys want power? Do you guys want food and everything like that? Just release the hostages. That's all you got to do. Hamas won't. The thing is, Hamas doesn't care about life, man. That's the fact of the matter. They cheer death, and we've seen that. You know, it's one thing when it's in their charter. It's another thing when they're saying it. But when you see it manifest, man, when you actually see the bodies of dead women, the dead girl, the German girl that was at the festival, and they're cheering it on, celebrating death. They do not care about life. They're willing to kill their own.
They don't.
They're willing to kill their own, and that's why I said the best thing that Israel can do right now for the Palestinians is get rid of Hamas.
Yeah.
Of course, are there going to be casualties and everything like that? Israel can only do so much, but like I said before, there has to be some more accountability on the broader Arab world. Like, these are your brothers and sisters. You guys can't provide any sort of refugee.
But there is a blockade. If Israel makes it that, but also again, just as I mentioned, Egypt is in a bit of a peculiar position because they're like, hey, you know what? We don't want these. It's
like, people are dying, but it's like, it's just inconvenient for us.
Yeah,
come on,
you know
bro.
what I mean?
Is that a really good look?
Yeah, so
you know
it's the whole it's an extremely tough situation because, and also too, like, expected, that's the sad part with these hostages, man. I don't know if any of them are gonna be able to make it because there is no way I mean, you know, what they're counting on is Israel in the past has exchanged thousands of Palestinian prisoners for one single soldier, right? But I feel like now there is such a Rubicon that has been crossed that now this is a different Israel. This is an Israel that wants all the smoke, no questions asked. We're going, but then again, too, like, so what is the end plan? Like, let's say they destroy Hamas. Who goes in there now? Are they going to do another occupation of Gaza? Because the last one, we've seen how that one turned out.
I don't know exactly,
you know what I mean?
Because I'm not an IDF general, so I don't know and I'm not sitting in the Knesset. So realistically, I can only see it maybe like 2-3 feet ahead of myself. I don't know how this is going to end. You know, because we're talking about right now with Hezbollah, right, in the north. We're talking about this can potentially become a regional conflict. Praying and hoping that it's not, you know. It is kind of biblical, but you know what I'm saying. But right now we're just kind of old. I mean, dude, I wake up every day and I'm just like, what's it gonna be today, bro? You know, like, where are we at today? Right now, all I see is the objective: get rid of Hamas, and then I don't know. I fair enough to say, man. I don't know all the answers sometimes, especially going forward. What I do know is that there has to be more grassroots level initiatives with Israelis and Palestinians to really start seeing the other person as you know, as an actual person, right? I think there's been a dehumanization on both sides, right? Where it's like the Israelis dehumanize the Palestinians demonize the Israelis or the Jews, right? I think they have to start coming together on a more grassroots. And there's fun, like, shout out to like Rudy Rockman or whatever, Rudy Rockman. There's a lot of other people that are activists for normalizing Israeli and Palestinian relations. We got to get rid of
radicals.
radicalism.
Mhm.
Sorry,
Mhm.
I guess it's been a long podcast.
Yeah.
Get some more water here, but anyways,
Yeah. Mhm.
yeah, we got to get rid of radicalism because it's ultimately it's going to it's going to lead us to only death and destruction and everything like that. Make cooler heads prevail, you know.
May cooler head prevails. Nathan, my brother, I appreciate you doing this, man. You know what I mean? These are important conversations, man. You know what I mean? Because it's important to kind of stress test everybody's points of view. And yeah, man, thank you for dedicating your time.